Today's release focuses on the Ahnenerbe, often viewed as the Reich's secret weapon, a nearly mystical, enigmatic order that was, in reality, a research institute. I have referenced this organization in at least 10 previous releases, highlighting how its members engaged in worldwide artifact searches. The Ahnenerbe is surrounded by a plethora of myths, legends, and conspiracy theories, making it one of the most misunderstood entities of the Third Reich. I first learned about the Ahnenerbe during my initial year at the Historical and Archival Institute. We attended a seminar led by guest lecturers from Moscow State University, focusing on the evolution of weaponry throughout history. One seminar was conducted by an elderly teacher, whose name I cannot recall, but he was around 70 years old and had served as a frontline soldier in the capture of Berlin. During our discussion, he shared that he took part in the assault on the Reich Chancellery in the spring of 1945 in Berlin. He recounted seeing unusual bodies, individuals of Asian descent dressed in SS uniforms, but with orange capes over them. Their origins were unclear, and there were multiple corpses present. Later, I encountered various accounts suggesting that the remains of Buddhist monks had been found among the ruins of the Reich Chancellery. Questions arise about their purpose there and how they arrived, yet these mysteries may never be resolved. The link between Nazi Germany and Tibet is quite evident, and I will elaborate on it later, particularly regarding the Ahnenerbe's role. This organization was deemed criminal in the Nuremberg Trials due to its involvement in fantastical claims related to flying saucers, paranormal abilities, telekinesis, and other mystical pursuits. Today, I will present a more detailed account of these matters. The second aspect of this narrative involves the inhumane experiments conducted on prisoners in concentration camps, focusing on topics such as blood clotting and frostbite. Thus, a significant number of individuals fell victim to this organization's actions, which I will discuss today. Let's explore what the Ahnenerbe is. The history of the Third Reich is deeply intertwined with mysticism and the occult. If you view documentary footage from the NSDAP Nuremberg rallies, you'll witness torchlight processions shaped like swastikas, alongside imposing banners and structured columns. This imagery undeniably evokes performance and mystical rituals, which is apparent to any observer. This imagery set Germany apart from other nations, as such events did not occur in the Soviet Union, the United States, or Great Britain. In Germany, however, it was a striking reality. When viewing footage created by Leni Riefenstahl or other documentaries, one observes an unsettling and mystical spectacle that unfolds right before your eyes, resembling an occult ritual. Where did all this originate? It can be argued that the German nation has long had an affinity for mysticism, reflecting in their philosophy and way of life. Generally, people are drawn to the unknown, including mysticism and the occult. While Germans were not unique in this respect, they perhaps stood out among other European nations for their deep engagement with these themes. During the final years of the Romanov Empire, we also experienced a flourishing of occultism, exemplified by figures such as Rasputin and Helena Blavatsky. By 1918, this fascination was prevalent among the elite. Following Germany's defeat in World War I, the country sought a point of reassembly and could have pursued various paths, including communism, but ultimately did not. In Munich, the Thule Society is established, fostering a mythology around the Atlanteans that will take on a grotesque interpretation and revival in Hitler's Germany. In 1918, the occultist and conspiracy theorist Rudolf von Svennindabe addresses this landscape by founding the Thule Society. This organization attracts Munich intellectuals intrigued by exploring mysticism. What is the origin of this society and what prompted its formation? Simply put, the narrative suggests that after Atlantis sank, the Atlanteans relocated to a place called Thule, though its exact location is uncertain, possibly near Iceland or Greenland, somewhere in Scandinavia. From this site, they purportedly gave rise to the Aryan race. If you've seen 17 Moments of Spring, you may recall the constant emphasis on the true Aryan Nordic character within the story. In my childhood, this reference seemed completely puzzling. According to the Thule Society, these true Aryans are believed to be descendants of the Atlantean progenitors, identified as the primary race on Earth. The Germans are claimed to descend from the Atlanteans and Hyperboreans, considered part of a significant Nordic civilization. The Thule Society was centered on uncovering these ancestral ties and roots. Unsurprisingly, the society harbored conspiratorial and racist ideologies, which led to the emergence of Hermann Wirth. He authored a work regarding the origins of humanity, asserting that the Nordic race was responsible for all beauty on Earth, including language and culture. In contrast, he referred to southern Gondwana as home to various subhumans, including black people and Slavs, whom he deemed inferior. In his view, these individuals distorted the Nordic language and contributed to the degeneration of humanity through their interactions with Nordic people. Consequently, the Germans are portrayed as descendants of a dominant race that has largely maintained its purity. It follows that they must unite to protect this racial integrity and assert their superiority as the primary people on Earth, viewing others as second class. This theory was presented as having a pseudo-scientific basis, accumulating various forms of evidence to support it, regardless of its authenticity. As we will explore further, this ideology gained genuine traction among German elites. It wasn't merely a gathering of frauds or delusional individuals, although certain questionable characters were present in the Thule Society. While we won't delve into that, it's clear that Adolf Hitler was a deeply problematic figure, and whether his actions were driven by rational motives or mystical beliefs is not our focus at this moment. The Munich intellectual community included prominent scholars and influential industrialists, among them Otto Rahn. I previously discussed him in relation to the Cathars and the Albigensian Wars. He conducted excavations in France, specifically at Montségur, the final stronghold of the Cathars, as he believed the Holy Grail was hidden there. He was a well-known archaeologist. Consequently, the Munich elite begins to adopt the ideals of the Thule Society. Simultaneously, Germany is grappling with a sense of national shame, making the mythology of being descendants of a superior race particularly appealing. Subsequently, key figures of the National Socialist Party in Germany become involved with the Thule Society. Rudolf Hess was one of the first to join, working as an assistant to Karl Haushofer, a professor within the society. Hess was drawn to the Society's emphasis on the superiority of the Aryan race and the German nation. Hess joined the Society, and at one point he introduced Hitler, who became deeply engrossed in its ideas. This led to ongoing discussions about whether Hitler genuinely believed in this mysticism or simply exploited it for his purposes. What is clear is that he became involved as well. Hans Frank, who would later become a prominent Nazi, also joined the Thule Society. During this time, the German Workers' Party was being formed, fueled by themes of mysticism and occultism alongside the rise of the Nazi movement. The swastika emerged during this period as well. While we now associate it primarily with Hitler's Germany, this ancient symbol predates modern Germany by centuries. Originating from Buddhist texts and found throughout Hinduism and Eastern traditions, including China, the swastika still appears in ornaments in places like Bali and India, where it symbolizes good fortune and prosperity. The swastika initially emerges within the Thule Society before it transitions to the symbols of the National Workers' Party of Germany. As Hitler rises in political influence, the National Socialist Party of Germany is formed. He personally approved the design of the swastika, a white symbol on a red background, which ultimately becomes the standard for Hitler's regime, first as the party flag and later as the national emblem. While often viewed as a deeply occult symbol, its origins are rooted not in German philosophy, but in Tibetan traditions. The development of the Thule Society coincides with Hitler's ascent to power, with the members of both groups closely interconnected. By the early 1920s, Heinrich Himmler, a key figure in our narrative, joined the National Socialist Party. At that time, he was seeking a new ideological foundation, having initially explored Catholicism, but concluding it didn't fulfill him. In his quest for alternative beliefs, he became involved with the Thule Society and was deeply influenced by its ideas. Himmler is infamously known as the principal architect of the Holocaust, responsible for signing orders regarding the extermination of Jewish people. The philosophy of the Thule Society perfectly resonated with him, particularly because it not only emphasized German superiority, but also held vehemently anti-Semitic views. In Munich, they began publishing the Beobachter, which would later evolve into the Völkischer Beobachter, the main propaganda outlet for Nazi Germany. This fiercely anti-Semitic publication argued that Jews were a blight on the German nation, blaming them for Germany's loss in the war and alleging their control over various societal aspects. The content echoed common anti-Semitic sentiments and was crafted by educated individuals. Himmler was particularly drawn to it and became increasingly involved. Having been exposed to occultism and mysticism since childhood, he started to perceive himself as the reincarnation of Henry the Fowler, a historical figure who first united the Germanic tribes. Himmler continued to cultivate these beliefs within himself, setting the stage for their future implications. Two intertwined movements emerged, the Occult and the National Socialist, essentially constituting a single party. In 1935, Hermann Wirth, previously mentioned, organized an exhibition titled The Heritage of German Ancestors. This event showcased numerous artifacts, stones, and runes that emphasized the dominance of Germanic civilization. The narrative suggested that this civilization had contributed immensely to the world, but had been stifled by Christianity, which destroyed pagan shrines and suppressed the German people. This idea began to garner attention at the time, and Himmler attended the exhibition, finding it immensely appealing. By 1935, with the Nazis in power, Himmler had become the head of the SS, serving as Hitler's personal guard. He supported the exhibition and the society Heritage of German Ancestors, Ahnenerbe, expressing approval by saying, "This is all very good." Himmler found it easy to promote his ideals because asserting that they were Aryans with a Nordic heritage established them as the dominant race was not sufficient without a scientific justification. The occult and mystical movement, which sought to uncover the beliefs of ancient Germans and evidence of their supremacy in Europe, aligned perfectly with Himmler's propaganda goals. He took the Ahnenerbe Society under his wing, appointing Wirth as its president, and together they began advancing this narrative. Simultaneously, Richard Dara, the Minister of Agriculture, attended the exhibition. By then, he had already written Blood and Soil, in which he explored the significance of ancient German villages and the authentic ties to the German spirit, themes that resonated well with the exhibition's message. It is important to note that while Hitler had an interest in mysticism, it was likely to a lesser degree than Himmler, who was deeply immersed in it. Himmler believed in concepts like the reincarnation of the Birdman and sought to establish a new religion, along with the Black Order of the SS and ideals of a monastic brotherhood. These themes would continue to unfold. However, it's essential to recognize that not everyone involved was a genuine believer in the occult. Many were likely charlatans. While some individuals truly embraced mysticism, a significant number exploited these beliefs for profit. They understood how to capitalize on those willing to believe, eagerly selling their mystical practices to eager customers. In contemporary society, many successful entrepreneurs often surround themselves with fortune tellers, magicians, and experts in various mystical fields, creating an aura of legends, beliefs, and astrological charts. This phenomenon has evolved over time and was even more pronounced in the past. An illustrative example is Karl Maria Wiligut, who became part of Himmler's circle. He hailed from old German nobility, but also had a background as a patient in a psychiatric hospital. Wiligut claimed that his family descended from Thor, the Scandinavian god, emphasizing a lineage connected to the figure wielding a hammer. Himmler was quite fascinated by Wiligut's claims, as Wiligut engaged in excavations and asserted that numerous ancient German temples housed magical artifacts, bestowing powers like telepathy and telekinesis. Encouraged by these ideas, Himmler began to support Wiligut's endeavors. Additionally, Wirth contributed by providing interpretations grounded in ancient texts and sagas. This brings us to the topic of runes. The insignia of the SS features 2 Sig runes, which are Scandinavian symbols that were widely used in Germany, not just by the SS, but also on the chevrons of various regiments. This fascination with runes flourished extensively. Runes are more than merely ancient Scandinavian letters. They serve as talismans and mystical symbols. Himmler was particularly intrigued by the idea of combining the 2 Sig runes to create both the SS logo and a powerful amulet. He readily accepted this notion, and everything seemed satisfactory until 1936. In 1936, Hitler vigorously criticized Hermann Wirth, the chairman of the Ahnenerbe Society, questioning the relevance of his ideas. He dismissed concepts such as Atlanteans and Mysticism, stating that they distracted from the goal of building a new future. While he acknowledged the importance of the Aryan nation, he deemed Wirth's fascination with occult practices and runes as nonsense. Hitler indicated that this could be communicated to Himmler, whom he regarded highly and often referred to as faithful Heinrich. He was a skilled courtier and an exceptional manager, adept at navigating bureaucracy and intrigue. Thus, Hitler valued him. However, he recognized Wiligut's peculiar beliefs and preferred that he keep them separate from the broader agenda of the Third Reich, as such ideas could create confusion among people. Wirth faced harsh criticism from Hitler, prompting Heinrich Himmler to recognize the potential fallout. In 1937, he expelled Wirth from Ahnenerbe and took over its leadership. Himmler then transformed Ahnenerbe from a society focused on studying German ancestral heritage into a comprehensive research institute addressing various aspects of German society. I will now present the departments listed on this sheet, though there were actually 3 more sheets detailing similar divisions, illustrating the extent of their influence across various facets of German society. One was the Department of Astronomy, which studied hypothermia by examining the freezing of prisoners and potential remedies like specific Aryan tea or hot water. Another was the Department of Biology, focused on enhancing the human body through medical research and other initiatives. The Department of Botany focused on cultivating new plant varieties, including wheat and livestock. The Department of Geology and Mineralogy conducted research on water and soil samples, which played a dual role. Geology was essential for constructing secret bunkers and landfills, while hydrology was significant for other purposes. Before the war with the Soviet Union, Ahnenerbe conducted an expedition to Lake Ritsa in Abkhazia, where they collected water samples deemed excellent. The Germans later became interested in using this high-quality water for creating blood plasma. Their research encompassed various disciplines, including the Department of Bulk Inhabited Hills, which conducted excavations across Germany and occupied territories. They sought to uncover evidence of ancient German culture, such as temples, sacrificial fire remains, weapons, and agricultural tools, to piece together the heritage of the German nation. The Department of German Art aimed to validate the claim that German art had been dominant in Europe since ancient times. However, it was disbanded in 1938 after achieving limited progress. The Department of Heraldry sought to establish a new elite, emphasizing the importance of coats of arms. They traced lineage back to the 8th or 10th generation, creating these heraldic symbols. An interesting anecdote involves a German actress who informed Himmler that the true Aryans, tall, blue-eyed blondes, were the ancients who triumphed over the Roman Empire, notably resisting the Roman legions at the Teutoburg Forest. When observing the upper echelons of the Reich, one might note that Himmler resembled a monkey, and Hitler appeared almost devilish. This raises the question of why they did not embody the Aryan ideal themselves. In response, someone remarked, "But we are Aryans in spirit." While this response is quite peculiar, it led to the establishment of a department focused on exploring these roots. The Department of Indo-German and Finnish Relations Research was dedicated to investigating traces of the Aryan race worldwide. including regions like Scandinavia, Tibet, Finland, and the Baltic states, asserting that these areas were linked to a grand Aryan proto-civilization. Additionally, there was a Department of Meteorology and another focused on karst and cave studies, which investigated ancient caves and German settlements within them. Research in plant genetics and the study of sagas and legends focused on the strength and mystical beliefs of ancient Germans, which were seen as applicable in contemporary society. Some bizarre theories emerged, including claims that swords found in the Teutoburg forest could help one reconnect with their ancestors. Though this notion seems absurd, it gained traction among certain groups. The term inhabited hills refers to an excavation carried out in Germany, where researchers sought evidence of ancient civilizations. The Department of Occult Sciences, as its name suggests, focused on mystical practices, while Department H specifically investigated witchcraft. An intriguing aspect of the Third Reich is its struggle with Christianity, which prompted the need for a new religion. Himmler enthusiastically promoted the idea to Hitler that Germany required this new belief system, suggesting a return to paganism rather than adhering to Christianity. They gathered testimonies about executed witches from across Europe as evidence of their supposed benevolence, arguing that Christians persecuted these individuals to erase the German civilization, spirit, and spirituality. This effort resulted in a comprehensive database documenting 35,000 witches who had been burned over the past 400 years. The Expedition Department, known as Department M, focused on mathematical research. The individuals involved in these studies contributed to the development of the V-2 rocket. Additionally, various national departments were tasked with overseeing regions such as Scandinavia, Holland, and Britain. Himmler had a well-defined strategy. We need to integrate the Ahnenerbe as a research institute into propaganda, religious practices, and educational systems, including schools and party organizations. In doing so, we will shape the spiritual and ideological foundation of the Third Reich. In reality, it appears that many believe Himmler perceived himself as Hitler's heir. He transformed the SS from mere security units into a substantial second army and established his own form of religion, akin to a monastic order, intending to lead the Third Reich following a victory over the Soviet Union. He envisioned a future where, after winning the war and with Hitler growing old, he would assume control, laying the groundwork for his own authority. Regarding the Tibetan monks, it remains unclear if they were buried under the rubble of the Reich Chancellery, and nobody truly knows. However, it is certain that the SS initiated an expedition to Tibet, which was commanded by Ernst Schaeffer, a scholar with a focus on Hinduism and Tibetan studies. In 1938, the expedition traveled to Tibet. Notably, at that time, one Dalai Lama had passed away, while the successor had not yet assumed his role, creating a period characterized by uncertainty in leadership. The Germans were welcomed in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, where they were shown ancient artifacts. Their primary objective was to establish a link between the ancient Tibetan civilization and the Aryan lineage, believed to be descendants of the German nation. Finding this connection was crucial. During their time there, they gathered artifacts, received ancient manuscripts, and collected high-altitude Tibetan wheat, which matures in just 60 days, despite the poor soil conditions of the highlands. This wheat was intended for planting in Reich territories. They also engaged in skull measurements, reflecting the Germans' fascination with this practice. They distinguished between Aryan and non-Aryan skull structures, measuring Tibetan skulls to support the claim that Tibetans and Germans were part of a greater national identity known as the Aryans. Additionally, they established a radio connection that would link Lhasa and Berlin throughout the duration of the war. There is a myth that they were in search of Shambhala, a legendary realm believed to grant individuals superhuman abilities, allowing them to traverse parallel worlds and interact in multiple dimensions simultaneously. This fascination with mysticism completely captivated them. Although the expedition did not discover Shambhala, they returned to Berlin carrying old manuscripts, dishes, and a Tibetan Great Dane gifted to Hitler, who, in my view, likely died en route and never reached Tibet. As a result of the expedition, a film titled Mysterious Tibet was produced and screened in cinemas across Hitler's Germany. The film aimed to demonstrate connections between Tibet, its lamas, and the occult practices found there, suggesting they were part of the German identity. It also showcased their dynamic and expressive dances. This sense of aggression and the drive to expand our living space is ingrained in us. Following this narrative, another expedition set out for the Middle East in 1938 to search for artifacts from an ancient civilization. Later that year, a third expedition ventured to Iceland, exploring the Viking heritage, which they considered part of the German nation. They focused on runes, rune stones, amulets, and various other relics. Furthermore, it is important to note that the SS took the study of runes and the Old Norse Edda seriously, offering this instruction exclusively to its members. This ancient Scandinavian epic, which I previously discussed in relation to the Vikings, served as a key focus. Additionally, SS members were taught about the ancient Germanic practices of executing homosexuals, the mentally ill, and traitors by drowning them in swamps, reinforcing the notion of their ruthless history. They emphasized that Germany had always been an aggressive nation dedicated to expanding its territory and that members should honor their predecessors. There was an expedition to Scandinavia involving a man named Uri von Grenhagen, whom Himmler deeply admired. Originally from Finland but residing in Germany, he translated the ancient Karelian epic Kalevala, in which he identified elements suggesting connections to an ancient German civilization. Impressed by his findings, Himmler dispatched Uri to Karelia to further investigate these links. There, he compiled a comprehensive file on witches, which ultimately grew to contain 30,000 entries by the end of the war. Alongside their focus on witches, they delved into various occult practices, including telekinesis, remote mind reading, distance communication, and hypnosis. While many were likely scammers, some individuals genuinely believed in these phenomena. In 1940, another expedition was launched to the Baltic states to search for evidence of ancient Teutonic influence, as the Teutonic Order had historic ties to both Prussia and the Baltic regions. They also searched for evidence of knowledge believed to have been transmitted from the ancient Germans to medieval knights, then to the Teutonic Order, and eventually to the Freemasons. This involved collecting a variety of artifacts, from crystal skulls, which I previously mentioned in relation to Mexican civilization, to attempts to excavate the Holy Grail at Montségur in France. These artifacts were gathered in Berlin with the purpose of uniting them to empower a new civilization in the Third Reich, endowed with mystical and magical properties. In 1942, Schaefer, who led the Tibetan expedition, traveled to the Soviet Union and the Caucasus to conduct excavations during the ongoing war. Approximately 7 years prior, a mysterious chest was discovered in Adygea, adorned with Ahnenerbe symbols and containing 2 unusual skulls. Initially thought to belong to extraterrestrial beings, it was later revealed that the skulls were simply those of deer missing their frontal lobes, which had inadvertently ended up in the chest. The chest, indeed, dated back to the Ahnenerbe expedition in 1942, when the Germans were excavating in the mountains in search of mystical artifacts. Meanwhile, another Ahnenerbe expedition ventured into Crimea, which had been captured by German forces. Their interest in Crimea stemmed from the historical invasions by Gothic tribes that once threatened Roman civilization, as these Goths were rooted in ancient Germanic heritage. Crimea was once a significant part of the Gothic kingdom, which is why the expedition focused on this area. They aimed to excavate ancient sites in hopes of uncovering artifacts related to their German heritage, believing it to be rooted in the Gothic kingdom. However, their efforts ultimately yielded no results. They had devised a grand plan for Crimea to become a resort for the elite of the Third Reich, even sending oaks there, considered emblematic of German identity, along with special wheat to cultivate pure crops thought suitable only for Aryans. The plan was to establish a resort for the highest ranks and party elite. Funding had already been allocated for this project. However, Crimea was soon lost due to the advances of the Soviet army, and Germany ultimately lost the war, preventing these plans from ever materializing. Despite the war's onset, they diligently searched for the Gothic kingdom, excavating sites with earnestness. By 1941, Otto Rahn was concluding his excavations in Montségur. Notably, upon his return from France, he declared a copper vessel, possibly a distillation cube, at Swiss customs. There are legends suggesting he discovered the Holy Grail and brought it to Germany, but the truth of those claims remains unknown. Otto Rahn's fate was tragic. He became disillusioned with Nazism as Hitler's actions unfolded across Europe. Ultimately, he was sent to a concentration camp, where he either succumbed to death or was killed. Some speculate that Hitler did not die by suicide or poisoning, nor was his body cremated afterward. At this point, Hermann Wirth is no longer in charge of Ahnenerbe, having been dismissed after criticizing Hitler. Heinrich Himmler took over as the head of the institute, while Wolfram Sievers became its chief administrator. Sievers held significant power within Ahnenerbe, overseeing its financing and administration. The man who would later be executed after the Nuremberg Trials is accountable for the atrocities committed by Ahnenerbe in concentration camps. I will provide more details on this later. These expeditions of the Third Reich involved Nazis scouring various parts of the world for mystical artifacts believed to be associated with the German nation. The plan was to assemble these artifacts, channeling the ancestral mystical power into the new man. Driven by their obsession with creating the new man, Himmler structured the SS like a monastic order. SS members were chosen based on ancestry, requiring them to present their lineage tracing back to before 1800. Additionally, when seeking to marry, they had to verify their partner's genealogy to ensure there were no Jews or subhumans in their background. Their aim was to create a new race of tall, strong, blue-eyed blondes through selective breeding. Marriages among SS members weren't simple affairs. They involved a special ceremony known as an SS wedding, requiring the presence of high-ranking officials. Additionally, there were guidelines dictating that children be conceived during the spring or winter solstice, following the practices of ancient Germans. In essence, the mix of mystical conspiracy theories that now flourish on YouTube, often with anti-vax sentiments, echoes the rigid doctrines of that time. Himmler was deeply preoccupied with historical narratives, focusing first on the extermination of Jews seen as obstacles to the German nation, and secondly, on the breeding of a new master race. Consequently, he essentially created a new religion, envisioning an entirely unique civilization of his own. Following Hitler's death, he aimed to take the lead in this endeavor, to transition from mysticism to stark realities. It's essential to discuss the artifacts, which the Germans sought out extensively. As I mentioned earlier, they attempted to excavate the Holy Grail at Montsegur, the final stronghold of the Cathars, and searched for crystal skulls in Latin America. A planned expedition to Lake Titicaca in the 1940s was abandoned due to the outbreak of war. Additionally, there was a project called the Hammer of Thor, initiated by the eccentric Karl Maria Wiligut, who claimed to descend from Thor. He proposed a theory suggesting that Thor's hammer was, in fact, a powerful electric weapon. Ahnenerbe was developing an electric weapon intended to harness lightning energy and channel it into a force that could disable enemy equipment without the need for traditional artillery. This initiative, which received funding, was known as the Hammer of Thor. The second initiative was labeled Gold of the Rhine, inspired by an ancient German legend. It proposed that gold could be extracted from the Rhine's waters using Aryan technology. Although the project was funded initially, it was eventually shut down. One project was titled the Spear of Longinus, referring to the spear that a Roman guard used to pierce Jesus. Several replicas exist. One is housed in Vienna, but it was relocated to Germany during the Anschluss. A copy of this spear was claimed to be the sole spear of Longinus, often known as the Spear of Destiny. It notably features in the childhood computer game Wolfenstein. Whoever wields the Spear of Destiny is believed to rule the world. This spear was transported to Berlin, from which a replica was made. One of these replicas was given to Himmler, who kept it in his castle. We will discuss the castle in more detail later, but for now, let's advance the narrative a bit to conclude the theme of mysticism. While some members search for Shambhala and others focus on translating the Kalevala and gathering information on witches, another segment of Ahnenerbe is dedicated to practical endeavors, specifically in medicine and science. Among their pursuits, the Germans are particularly passionate about discovering a cure for cancer. To achieve this, They turned to ancient Germanic homeopathy, botany, herbal studies, and the enigmatic Aryan tea, known for its wound-healing properties. One individual involved in this effort was Philipp von Lucerberg, a botanist focused on homeopathy who researched the potential of herbs in cancer treatment. However, no effective cure was discovered as cancer continued to claim lives among Germans during and after the war. This phenomenon is often referred to as a more or less harmless consequence. August Hirt was a figure known for his research on the effects of gas exposure on humans, which involved experiments conducted on individuals from concentration camps. His studies aimed to determine how much gas a person could tolerate, particularly whether administering an antidote after a dose would allow them to survive. I'm summarizing this quite broadly, as I'm not a medical expert and prefer not to delve into the details. All of Hirt's experiments were conducted on prisoners, reflecting his extreme anti-Semitic views and his belief in the superiority of the Aryan race, which he supported through pseudo-scientific methods. He conducted skull measurements in his Strasbourg laboratory, and when Allied troops arrived, they discovered bodies preserved in formalin that he had dissected for his pseudo-medical research. Hirt possessed a large collection of Jewish skulls, which he used to substantiate their supposed racial inferiority through various measurements. Engaging in medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners was a common practice, and one individual involved was Edward May, an entomologist who appeared to be focusing on relatively harmless research. He focused his research on parasites, as well as various types of rats, cockroaches, and insects. Subsequently, all of his archives and drawings disappeared, an issue we will address later. Nonetheless, the Germans advanced significantly in their efforts to develop bacteriological weapons. Heinz Brücker focused on plant genetics, specifically aiming to enhance the fertility of wheat, potatoes, tomatoes, and other crops. This work was crucial due to the pressing issue of food supply. At one point, he claimed that Germany would face a food shortage in the coming centuries, asserting that the advancements in plant genetics he was developing could address this challenge. But how did he arrive at this conclusion? Brücker developed some of his research independently, but he also collaborated with SS military units in the Soviet Union to steal the archives of Vavilov, a notable Soviet geneticist. Drawing from Vavilov's work, Brücker began his own research on plant breeding and hybridization. After the war, he was not prosecuted and continued his work in botany and plant breeding, experimenting with various fertilizers. He eventually settled in Argentina, where he was killed at the age of 71 on his farm. Rumor has it that he later developed a parasite that affected cocaine crops, leading to his demise at the hands of the Colombian mafia upon their discovery of his involvement. That's the story. Alex Berg is another notable figure in homeopathy, primarily recognized for his experiments with herbs intended for bodily application. These herbs were said to heal wounds, and he even concocted what he termed Aryan tea, which seemed to serve more as a prop than a legitimate remedy. Despite this, he continued his work. In contrast, Sigmund Rascher was one of the more horrifying individuals associated with these efforts. He operated at Dachau and maintained personal correspondence with Himmler, conducting experiments to witness how quickly a near-death person could be revived, which was deemed critical for wartime needs. There was a theory called spiritual warmth, suggesting that heating the body of someone suffering from frostbite would aid in their recovery. Unfortunately, many individuals died due to this misguided belief. Furthermore, experiments conducted in pressure chambers revealed alarming statistics. Only 2 out of every 200 subjects survived such tests. These experiments aimed to determine how long a person could endure low pressure and were deemed crucial for advancements in submarine and aviation technologies. Sigmund Rascher met a grim fate as he conducted experiments on hypothermia, pressure chambers, poisons, and injuries, observing how quickly bleeding could be halted in wounded individuals during battle. He also ventured into gynecology, claiming he would help German women overcome infertility. He boasted that his wife had given birth to their second child at 49 and a third at 52 due to a miraculous drug he had developed. However, he had only tested this drug on her, promising its availability at pharmacies soon. Himmler greatly admired Rascher's work, but in the 1940s, a scandal erupted when Rascher's wife was caught attempting to steal a baby at a train station in Munich. An investigation revealed that the children she claimed to have conceived in her late 40s and early 50s were actually abducted infants. Rascher had not made any significant advancements in gynecology, and both he and his wife faced tragic fates. She committed suicide while he was executed by a bullet to the back of the head in a concentration camp just before the Allies arrived. This turn of events seemed aimed at covering up their activities. Thus, his story concluded. Ahnenerbe encompassed a wide array of endeavors. On one side, individuals explored mysticism to support the Aryan theory, while on the other, practical experiments were conducted to enhance military tactics and medicine. Himmler regularly participated in Ahnenerbe's scientific councils and, as its president, was deeply involved in these activities. Who funded Ahnenerbe's extensive activities remains a key question. The Institute received significant financial support, which attracted many young scientists due to the competitive pay. While less serious projects like the Rhine Gold were quickly shut down, serious research in botany and medicine was very well funded. The Reichsbank partially financed Ahnenerbe, along with substantial contributions from Himmler's circle of allies. Ultimately, as the Eastern tribes sought to assimilate the German nation, history remained silent on the outcome of this perceived battle of good versus evil. These industrialists and manufacturers who distanced themselves from politics, a viewpoint echoed during the Nuremberg Trials, were part of Himmler's circle of associates. Notably, 2 of the largest donors to Ahnenerbe were Daimler-Benz and BMW. They provided grants and funding for the various experiments conducted by the organization. It seems that the relationship worked in 2 ways. On one hand, Himmler's associates approached Mercedes for financial contributions, making it difficult for the company to refuse. On the other hand, Mercedes and BMW had military contracts and also utilized labor from concentration camp prisoners in their factories. This arrangement resulted in a mutually beneficial partnership with substantial funding. The second question is about Hitler's role in all of this. While it's tempting to portray him as a mystic or an unhinged madman, The reality is different. Eyewitness accounts suggest he was an intelligent, talented, and pragmatic individual. In his quest to establish a new Aryan race and religion, rejecting Christianity in favor of what he believed was a new belief system for Germans, he actively supported Himmler's efforts. Beyond this initiative, he showed little interest in their activities. At one point, Himmler consolidated various mystical concepts into a theory that positioned higher forces as supporting Hitler. He portrayed Hitler as not merely advancing the German nation, but doing so with the backing of his pagan ancestors. This transformed Hitler's actions into a mission rather than just a power grab, which undoubtedly appealed to him. Himmler effectively capitalized on this narrative. In my view, Himmler genuinely believed in this ideology. He portrayed himself as a loyal supporter of the regime, and Hitler, earning the nickname Faithful Heinrich for emphasizing that he was merely a reflection of Hitler. However, at the same time, he was also working to establish a new German civilization for himself. This is what we will delve into next. The story of Wewelsburg Castle began in 1934, as it became notable in various films, including its portrayal in the game Wolfenstein, which is based on this very castle. This was Himmler's residence. Initially, the plan was to establish a school there, a training center for SS personnel featuring a university and camp facilities. This initiative commenced in 1934. Why was Wewelsburg Castle chosen? It was largely due to Karl Maria Wiligut, who claimed descent from Thor and convinced Himmler of its significance. He presented it as an ancient cult site for Germanic tribes. Nearby stood the Irminsul tree, revered by the ancient Germans and destroyed by Charlemagne during the Frankish era. Regarded as a symbol of life for the Germanic people, its destruction marked the encroachment of Christianization on their heritage. Adjacent to these sacred sites lies Wewelsburg Castle, where Himmler initially began constructing a school for the SS before ultimately establishing his residence. This leads us to the history of the SS's Black Order, which extended beyond a mere organization to include military units and Hitler's personal security forces. Himmler envisioned it as a monastic brotherhood. Notably, there was the famous SS ring, known as the Dead Chapter, which Himmler personally issued and awarded. Today, these rings are rare collectibles sought after by numismatists. They feature a silver design adorned with a skull, SS runes, and the owner's name engraved on them. The ring was personally bestowed by Himmler as a symbol of appreciation for significant accomplishments within the SS. Upon a member's death, the ring would be returned to Wewelsburg Castle, where it was stored in the crypt among the pantheon of fallen heroes. This ring symbolized the order's property. It was never to be lost, sold, or exchanged. Himmler viewed the SS as akin to a monastic order, which is why training in runes was emphasized, believing they could confer luck, serve as talismans, and grant battle powers. Lectures by Herbert Janken taught SS members about ancestral swords and their supposed ability to bestow such powers, fostering this belief. A replica of the Spear of Longinus was brought to Wewelsburg Castle and displayed in Himmler's study, which was also adorned with runes. I visited the castle, which was destroyed in 1945. However, the North Tower, where key events took place, has since been restored. The tower contains multiple floors, with a crypt at the bottom dedicated to the most notable SS heroes buried there, and a circular hall at the top. This hall features 48 windows in its dome and is known as the Hall of the Holy Grail, where an eternal flame once burned, leaving behind pipes. Notably, the black sun mosaic remains on the floor. This symbol, also derived from ancient Tibetan tradition, can be found in Wewelsburg Castle, which is accessible to tourists. Visitors often report a strange energy there that leaves them feeling unwell. While I don't suggest there are hidden fascist secrets in the basements, it's evident that the location has absorbed the intense energies of those who gathered there, some filled with fanaticism, others driven by darker motives. Himmler transformed the castle into his residence, and the map of Wewelsburg indicates extensive renovations were made to its structure. The castle's design resembles a triangle, echoing the shape of the Spear of Longinus. Its construction was steeped in the symbols that Himmler heavily promoted, reflecting his fascination with Tibet and his interest in yoga and Hinduism. He seemed to be positioning himself to lead a new world order. Various runes and artifacts were brought to the castle, which was destroyed in 1945 as the Soviet army advanced. However, it has since been restored and is now open to visitors. The castle was the intended storage location for silver rings, death's head rings, and the Spear of Fate, among other items. It is also the site of the legendary battle at the last birch tree, which is said to have occurred nearby. This clash between Western and Eastern civilizations marked a significant divide between two tribes. All of this was constructed on a fundamentally mystical foundation, as Himmler sought to create a new religion. The Haxen department, focusing on witches and conspiracy theories, gathered witch-related artifacts from across Europe. In contrast, the M department was a practical branch of Ahnenerbe that dealt with mathematics, led by a man named Bozak. Evidence suggests that Ahnenerbe members were involved in all technological projects of the Third Reich. By the end of the war, the Third Reich had achieved significant technological advancements. They introduced the first jet, the Mr. Schmidt, and developed the V-2 ballistic missile. Furthermore, German scientists made substantial progress toward creating a nuclear reactor and worked on biological weapons. Members of Ahnenerbe were involved in these initiatives, accessing archives and contributing to their development. However, documents reveal that Himmler ensured his personnel were involved in all these scientific initiatives. So, what became of them? They did not simply vanish. The Ahnenerbe archives ended up in the hands of the Allies after the castle was destroyed and later restored. Notably, Bozak, who led the M department, disappeared without a trace after the war, leaving no evidence of his existence. Wolfram Sievers, the leader of the Ahnenerbe, was present at the Nuremberg Trials. He was not tried there, but was later included on a list of individuals facing punishment, numbered around 2,000 or 2,100. Ultimately, he was executed by hanging, likely because he possessed information that those organizing the Nuremberg trials preferred to keep from the public. The Americans conducted two operations, Clouds and Paperclip, aimed at recruiting German scientists and Ahnenerbe staff to bring them to the United States. While Werner von Braun was not part of Ahnenerbe, he played a key role in developing the V-2 rocket and was still brought to America. Although Congress prohibited the entry and employment of Ahnenerbe members in the U.S., many were secretly transported, and these operations were kept classified. The Ahnenerbe archives remain classified in both the United States and elsewhere, likely containing information that many might prefer not to contemplate. Unfortunately, Himmler escaped justice. In 1945, he engaged in separate negotiations with the Allies, displaying remarkable cynicism. He even reached out through intermediaries to the International Jewish Congress, despite being responsible for the Holocaust, offering his assistance. In a bid to demonstrate goodwill, 100,000 Jews were released from concentration camps, an effort to escape scrutiny. Hitler eventually learned of these separate negotiations and chose Donetsk as his successor over Himmler, viewing Himmler as a traitor. However, the war had concluded, and Himmler was apprehended while attempting to flee, using forged documents for his escape. Unfortunately, he did not survive to witness the Nuremberg Trials and was not executed. Later, Sievers, the leader of the Ahnenerbe, faced hanging. Meanwhile, all the other Ahnenerbe members I mentioned went on to live their lives without consequences. Take, for instance, Uriah von Granhagen, who passed away in 2003. Many of these individuals enjoyed long lives. While it might seem mystical, attributing their longevity to ancient Germanic forces is unnecessary. Instead, they continued to teach, pursued scientific work, or even traveled to Latin America, like one person who battled cocaine plantations. Overall, they faced no severe consequences after the war. Another significant figure was Rudolf Levin, the leader of Sonderkommando Hexen, which focused on researching paranormal abilities and documenting witchcraft, having collected 30,000 witch-related forms from across Europe. He mysteriously vanished in 1945, leaving no trace behind. Those in charge of such crucial divisions, like his in the mathematics department, simply disappeared. It is possible that the Allies took them out, or perhaps they lived under different identities in Latin America. This marks the end of Ahnenerbe's narrative. However, I would like to share one more topic frequently linked to Ahnenerbe, even though it may not have any real connection, though this is uncertain. Finally, I want to recount a story that many associate with Ahnenerbe, despite its lack of direct ties to it. This is the story of New Swabia, where one theory suggests individuals fled to Latin America, while another proposes they went to Antarctica. There's a long-standing conspiracy theory regarding the Antarctic Reich. During an extensive expedition in 1938-39, the German Society for Polar Research set out for Antarctica aboard the research vessel Swabia, equipped with a Dornier flying boat capable of landing on ice. Once in Antarctica, particularly in an area now known as Queen Maud Land, they explored hollow karst caves and documented their findings. What was the purpose of this expedition? Germany sought to claim Antarctica, asserting it as ungoverned territory. However, the Germans believed they warranted some stake in it, proudly linking themselves to their Viking ancestry, with claims that Vikings might have explored the area. Numerous scientific studies on Antarctica emphasize its status as a new continent, underscoring the need to establish a polar station there. this much is certain. Where did the conspiracy theory originate? In 1947, 2 years after World War II concluded, the United States launched an expedition known as Operation High Jump. The aim was to assess whether flight times for missiles could be shortened over Antarctica, which might pose a threat to the U.S. This operation included warships and aircraft and sought to determine if the Soviet Union could establish air bases in the region for potential attacks on New York. A few individuals lost their lives during the expedition due to an accident on one of the ships, ultimately forcing a return. Several years later, reports began to emerge in the media claiming that when the Americans arrived in the area, flying discs adorned with swastikas surfaced from beneath the water. It was alleged that they were fired upon with laser technology and resulted in the loss of 5 ships. This narrative ties into the story of New Swabia, suggesting that after their defeat in World War II, elements of the Third Reich used submarines to transport Hitler and valuable archives there. Ahnenerbe is said to have merged the elite of the Nazi regime with extraterrestrial entities, purportedly acquiring advanced technologies by collecting archaeological artifacts. This civilization supposedly went underground into Antarctica, establishing a new colony known as New Swabia. A quick online search will reveal numerous theories and articles that support these claims, along with various newspaper reports documenting them. It's true that the Americans lost part of their fleet during Operation High Jump, which indeed took place. This is the intriguing narrative surrounding New Swabia, with Ahnenerbe's involvement emphasized throughout. Regarding Mr. Schmidt and the jet, I previously mentioned that numerous accounts suggest the Germans developed flying saucers, although they never had the opportunity to deploy this technology. They reportedly created a weapon capable of altering geomagnetic fields, potentially inducing earthquakes, among other effects. A wealth of mystical and conspiratorial stories surrounds this subject, particularly those linked to a crypt marked Ahnenerbe. This organization is often viewed as both semi-mystical and semi-occult, but fundamentally it was also criminal in nature and engaged in practical research. It indeed existed. That's how it all began and how it culminated. Lastly, I want to highlight Rudolf von Sebottendorf, the man behind these developments. He founded the Thule Society, which eventually gave rise to Ahnenerbe. By the 1940s, he had fallen out of favor due to his obsession with mysticism and occultism, ultimately relocating to Istanbul. Reports suggest that he may have acted as a spy, working for German intelligence through the Abwehr, though it's also possible he simply indulged in occult practices there. The precise details remain unclear, but it is known that after Germany's defeat in 1945, he tragically committed suicide by jumping into the Bosphorus one morning. This concludes the account of Ahnenerbe, likely one of the most secretive mystical organizations within the Third Reich. I have shared all the information I gathered regarding mysticism and its practical applications. It was a genuinely frightening institution, unlike the computer games or entertaining Indiana Jones films we often see. It was a genuinely tangible entity. Thank you.